So in this video, we're going to draw the short run and long run Phillips curve. So first off, the x-axis is going to be unemployment. Y-axis is going to be inflation. So the short run Phillips curve is going to curve down like this. And long run curve is going to be a straight vertical line. So this graph pretty much just shows the Phillips curve, which is the relationship between inflation and unemployment, and the downward sloping curve is short run Phillips curve, and the vertical line is the long run Phillips curve, which occurs at the natural rate of unemployment or full employment. So everything except the cyclical one. Now to explain the short run Phillips curve, this is going to be a point where there's a negative output gap. Or a recessionary gap, and that's going to be, as I said, the full employment. And this gap above here is going to be the inflationary gap, or inflation, or positive output gap. So this point represents pretty much when there's aggregate demand is high and unemployment is low, so there's inflation increases. And point B is where there's full employment, so like they're operating at the natural rate of unemployment, and this point is going to be when unemployment is high because and inflation is low because aggregate demand in the economy is pretty weak. So pretty much the short run Phillips curve shows like an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. So as unemployment decreases, inflation increases. And this happens because like higher aggregate demand causes firms to hire like more workers and increase production. So more workers means more production, means prices also go up. And there's the other hand, or like the inverse relationship, where it's unemployment that rises. Like this is as it goes up, that one's as it goes down. Unemployment rises, inflation tends to fall, because both spending and production decreases. Now, to explain the long run Phillips curve, first of all, it's vertical because in the long run, the economy always returns to natural rate of unemployment. Or I'm just going to write full employment. Because workers and firms all eventually like adjust their expectations and wages, causing unemployment to move back to its natural level. And even if inflation changes, unemployment cannot like permanently stay below the natural rate. And now we're gonna see the relationship between an aggregate demand increase. So I'm just gonna draw the graph. Vertical axis is gonna be price level, and horizontal axis is going to be real GDP. So there's going to be an upward sloping short run aggregate supply, and there's going to be a downward sloping aggregate demand. Let's just call it 1. Okay, so after that, we're going to shift aggregate demand to the right. So now we have aggregate demand 2. So the equilibrium changes as well, which basically shows a higher price level as well as higher output. So pretty much when aggregate demand increases, the aggregate demand curve shifts to the right. This causes real GDP and the price levels to rise. And because firms produce more output, they hire like more workers, so unemployment pretty much falls. So back to the Phillips curve. This is shown as like movement upward to the left along the short run Phillips curve. So like that, it moves. So inflation rises while unemployment falls. And we have the inverse one, the other one, where price level, GDP real, aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply. Where when aggregate demand decreases, the aggregate demand curve shifts left. And real GDP falls, and the price level also decreases, which means that firms produce less output and unemployment rises. So on the Phillips curve, the economy makes like a downward shift to the right, so like this. So inflation falls while unemployment increases. And in the scenario where aggregate supply decreases, this means that higher price level and a lower GDP. So this creates higher inflation and lower output at the same time. And because output falls, unemployment increases. And this is like the worst possible thing you could have, called stagflation. And the Phillips curve is going to shift right. I'm just going to draw a new one because it's running out of spaces. It's going to shift right, where a decrease in aggregate supply shifts the entire short-run Phillips curves to the right, so the economy is experiencing higher inflation at like every level of unemployment. And we have the other scenario when aggregate supply increases instead, which is shown by this. Aggregate supply moving. So the curve shifts right and output increases while inflation falls. So on the Phillips curve, the short-run aggregate supply curve, on the Phillips curve, the short-run Phillips curve shifts left. So pretty much changes in aggregate demand causes movement along the short-run Phillips curve, but when there's changes in supply, it shifts like the entire short-run Phillips curve.